Welcome everybody. It is May 25. Gary and I are back. Before we start, I want to mention this is our 50th video in the last 2 years. Who'd have thought that we'd be still going, talking about the same thing 2 years later. So
I just wonder if people are getting tired of looking at us.
Could be the case. So we wanted to really mix up the show today, so we have switched chairs. You might not have noticed that. So let's start off. Let's start with our usual slide, our epidemiology slide. So the slide goes up and you will see that our cases continue to rise. Remember, these are positive cases, getting quite high, well over 15%. And realize these are the cases that are reported to public health, or through our lab, actually, through our lab. We know that wastewater studies throughout the United States say that we're probably only catching the tip of the iceberg, and we're expecting numbers to continue to go up. We know that this has been an ambulatory surge, and you don't need me to tell you that. Those of you who are out there on the front lines every day are treating these patients. Fortunately, we have good antivirals, and they're in plenty of supply. So no shortage of Paxlovid. Two things left over from our last meeting is that post-exposure use of Paxlovid does not work, so don't even try it. And then secondly, you're going to get calls from people saying, hey, I'm going to Europe. Can I take a 5-day Paxlovid? And just a reminder, it's still under emergency use authorization. The only indication is for active COVID, so you should not be prescribing it for people who want to go away.
Yeah, I think, Gary, in those situations, if we give it to people traveling, because so many people want to travel, we'll run out of drug.
Yeah.
I think we'll run short of
half of them won't use it.
That's right.
It'll be a waste, yeah. Some studies have shown that as much as 49 or 50% of cases are transmitted from asymptomatic individuals. So that just makes it very challenging. Probably a good argument to wear your mask or hold your breath whenever you go outside your home, right? Because it is out there. So, so we're all familiar that it's an ambulatory mild case, but what are you seeing in the hospital? Does it reflect that?
We've seen an uptick of cases in the hospital, but at our hospital, it's all incidental cases.
Okay.
So people are not in the ICU struggling to breathe on ventilators. So we're really seeing very minimal pneumonia at all.
Good.
Other hospitals have also reported an uptick in cases. I don't know if they're really that severe. The last I saw from the county was 3 or 4 patients in the ICU only. And again, some of our ICU cases were people who were in the ICU for other reasons, and their COVID test was positive.
Okay. So it's really a very different situation we've had previously.
Yeah, I was really expecting to see the unvaccinated come in for severe disease. Yeah. We don't even see that right now, which is interesting because I mean that the virus is probably less virulent even in the unvaccinated, but that's not for prime time. That's my own guesstimation. We
are going to turn COVID behind. Gary, last video we did, you talked about the flu and this untimely or surprising rise in incidence of flu. What's happened in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think there's some good news. We're still seeing a fair amount of flu. I was in the ER with a separate case on call last week, and there were 3 people in the ED from age 2 to age 70s with influenza. So there clearly is influenza being seen. And this is an updated data set from CDPH. This comes out every week. And there's one slight tick. The red line or the red dots is the influenza season now. And you can see that from the other seasons in the background there of the dotted lines, the green line, the blue lines. Those are previous seasons. And now this red line is the influenza season now. This is like the wrong time to see flu go up. But at the very right, you see it tick down a little bit. So maybe we've seen most of it, but we'll be following that over the next few weeks. And we'll bring that to the group, whether it's by email or by video. I'll let you know how the flu season's faring. This is not novel flu. This is seasonal influenza. It's H3N2 influenza A specifically, and that is built into the vaccine, but this year, the vaccine didn't match that very much. There was drift within vaccine manufacturing and with the choice of vaccine. So that didn't match, and now with people traveling and unmasking and going indoors, I think that's the reason for the flu season to go up.
Okay. So now we're going to turn to something novel that you've all heard about. It's been on the front page, the back page, on the news. Monkeypox, something I had never heard of a month ago, but we're going to pick your brain as an infectious disease specialist. Can you educate us a bit about monkeypox?
So I think it's amazing that it feels like we just don't get a break. If it's not the war in Ukraine, it's this weird thing of monkeypox. And it is historic. I mean, this is really an amazing time for monkeypox. Now in 2013, we actually had a small cluster of cases. I wouldn't even call it an outbreak, but a cluster of cases, maybe an outbreak, in the US where there were some Gambian rodents from Ghana that were housed together in a pet store with prairie dogs. And the prairie dogs got infected, and the prairie dogs infected other people. And I think there were 73 cases in the US that time, and I think there was only one fatality. And so we've seen monkeypox here, and there was a little bit of human-to-human transmission, but it was just a cluster of cases. And so every year in every country, whether it's Scotland, Australia, in the US, we'll see cases of monkeypox. And it's interesting though that monkeypox, you're amazing.
I'm hungry.
It's interesting that the monkeypox virus is typically travel related. And so people will have it, be incubating, come to the US, develop a lot of rashes, and then you see one travel related case. What we're seeing now is just in the AP News, and this is a news blurb I'll show you from May 20th. Britain, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Sweden, the US, Australia, Canada, and then later on, we also see cases in Belgium, Germany, and France. There are reported cases of monkeypox in different areas. However, many of these patients don't have a travel history. If they don't have a travel history, that means there's human-to-human transmission there. And so I thought what I'd do is share with the group kind of what are the pearls, what are the caveats of monkeypox, what do you need to know in case patients are barraging you with questions, peppering you with questions, what do you need to know to answer them really well so that alleviates a lot of fears. I don't think this is going to be the next pandemic. It doesn't have the same contagiousness, it doesn't have the same human-to-human transmission, but there are some caveats to know because it's unusual for us to see this many cases. And I think the case count right now is 300. 300 cases of monkeypox, and usually it comes up as popcorn, one case here, one case there, but now we're seeing some transmission. What's very interesting is the first cases in Spain and in Portugal, they were seen with unusual genital lesions in a sexual health clinic. And most of these were very young, healthy men. And as you dive in a little bit more, the vast majority were in gay, bisexual men or men who have sex with men. So we don't know if it's a sexually transmitted disease. And the UK Ministry of Health is looking very carefully to see if that's a mode of transmission because it never has been in the past. But it might just be really intense, prolonged person-to-person contact, like maybe at a concert or a rave party. So there, or maybe it's someone who was exposed with bedding because crested lesions can be contagious. So maybe there's a fomite involved, like with bedding or sheets or clothing that we just haven't elucidated yet. But let me show you a couple things. So in the US, there are cases confirmed in Massachusetts, New York, Florida, 2 in Utah. There's a case that's under investigation in Washington that looks like it's going to be, and there's also a case in Sacramento, California. So California has its first case. Let me show you the next one is a map. This is a worldwide map by the World Health Organization, and this shows you in blue and light blue, dark blue, where the cases are kind of popping up now. Canada has been somewhat of a cluster of cases. So Canada is investigating, I think, 30 cases right now. But as you can see, I put the stars where monkeypox is endemic, and really the Congo is the big one. The Congo and West Africa are the big areas where it is endemic, but it's not endemic in Australia, and they've had cases. It's not endemic in Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and we're seeing cases pop up there with human-to-human transmission. Now, let me show you the next slide. The next slide is kind of what you need to know. I kind of boiled this down thinking, what are patients going to ask you? What are your neighbors going to ask you? What are you going to hear on the news that you want to understand? Is that really good information or is that not good information? A little bit about monkeypox. What is it? It's a DNA virus. So it's a double-stranded DNA virus. It's in the family Poxviridae, and it's a genoorthopoxvirus. So who's in that class? Smallpox is in that class, vaccinia is in that class, cowpox is in that class. But of monkeypox, there's 2 types, and we call them clades. There's the Congo Basin clade, which is more contagious, more severe. Not terribly more severe, but a little bit more severe. And then there's the West Africa clade, and that's the one that was probably transmitted in the prairie dogs in the US, and that's a less contagious, less virulent clade. And so what I put down here for the West Africa clade, we think that the R0 number is 1.1 to maybe 2, and it's less severe, mortality maybe 3 to 6%, and in the US less than 1% when we have that outbreak. That's the clade that we're seeing right now in the world. It's the West Africa clade that's breaking out. And it seems to be the same clade as best we can tell, but that's very preliminary information. And I just put as a reminder here, in 2003, we had 47 cases in the Midwest with the prairie dogs. In July and November of last year alone, we had 2 separate travel cases coming out of Nigeria and Africa. Now on the next slide, I'm going to put you kind of what you need to know clinically, and this gives you good pearls for your patients. Clinically, on the next slide, the incubation period is like 1 to 2 weeks. Maybe goes out to 3 weeks, but the incubation is 1 to 2 weeks. You're not contagious during the incubation period, and that should help you with patients when you talk to them. If you're not contagious during the incubation period, it's not like measles, where measles is contagious for 48 hours before people have a fever. So if someone is exposed to someone and they're not symptomatic, even if they're going to come down with disease, they're not contagious during that incubation period. How does it start? It starts with a flu-like illness. It doesn't start with a rash. So it starts with flu-like illness with fevers, chills, headache, and body aches. It looks very much like the flu, or if you're in Africa, it looks very much like dengue fever. But it looks like the flu, except there's a little bit more prominent lymphadenopathy, sometimes just cervical, and then sometimes generalized. But you'll see more prominent tender lymphadenopathy.
And no cough.
No, not much of a cough.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a sore throat, but not a cough.
Okay.
It's not a respiratory disease. So that takes it out of influenza versus COVID, right? Because flu presents with a strong cough, and that's a really good point, Gary. And then the rash. What about this funny rash we hear of monkeypox? It develops 1 to 3 days later. So the rash doesn't develop when you might see someone with influenza. The rash usually starts on the face, then it goes to the extremities, look at the palms and soles, and then it goes to the trunk last. It starts as macules, papules, vesicles, then pustules. I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. And then the illness lasts for 2 to 4 weeks. It's very self-limited. And once you're done with monkeypox, you actually have immunity not just to monkeypox, but also to smallpox.
So you mentioned it's not contagious during the incubation. When is it contagious? Is it the lesions?
No, so very good question. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
That's a perfect segue. Actually, I'll answer that in just a minute. But
okay.
the brief answer is it's more respiratory droplets.
Yeah.
So it's contagious like the flu. It's contagious by respiratory droplets. Sneezing, sore throat, blowing your nose, and the lesions are contagious, but they show up later.
Okay.
So these are the lesions, and I kind of show you the evolution of lesions here. On the top left, I put a red circle around the macule. That's how it starts. Starts as a macule. Then it goes to a papule, then it moves into a vesicle. And in a minute, I'm going to show you another slide. The vesicle's really thick. The vesicle's pretty thick. It's not going to break open easily, like you would see with pemphigus or pemphigoid. Then it moves into this crusting stage, and the crusting stage has an umbilical nature to it. The lesions are not subtle, so you're not looking for little tiny lesions. Let me show you the next slide. This is a case recently in the US in a traveler, and as you can see, this is the pustular stage, where it's really a well-demarcated red ring around this pustule. It's tender, not exquisitely tender, but it's moderately tender, and they're on the dorsal and the palm of the hand, as well as other places in the body. It can be in the genital area, which is kind of how it was picked up in Spain and Portugal, where they thought it was a herpes reaction, but it looks much different from herpes because it's much more tender and much more thick and very pronounced. Now this gets back to, let's talk about the next slide. This comes to the CDC. What do you need to know generally about monkeypox? It's not easily contagious. So it's not very contagious from human to humans, but it can be if you have prolonged close contact. Well, prolonged close contact has typically been household contact where you're caring for someone because they have the flu, they're wiped out, they're in bed. I mean, the fatigue from this is really prominent. These are people like influenza that don't want to get out of bed. And so if you're a household member and you're caring for someone, that prolonged close contact with feeding and bathing and helping, and then also healthcare providers because we're in close contact with patients in a prolonged setting. So, and that raises the question, what's happening now? What is the prolonged exposure now? Has behavior not changed where we have like maybe a rave party where people are together for hour upon hour at a concert and they're really close in proximity? Is that the contact? So is it behavior driven, or has the virus changed a little bit to become more transmissible? We don't know yet, and that's being under study. So typically the virus spreads through the mucous membranes. It can spread through broken skin. There are zoonotic elements of it, where animals, if you're in Africa, typically when you clean animals for bushmeat, if that animal's infected, you can pick it up cleaning the animal. If you're handling like a prairie dog in 2013 and you got scratched or bit by the prairie dog infected, you can get it from an animal. And then fomites. The rash lesion in the pustules, the material in the pustule is contagious. So in the weeping phase, if you were to unroof a pustule, that's contagious. That has a lot of virus in it. When the virus is in the crusting stage, the crust is also contagious. And that's how we're going to make the diagnosis. If we're going to see someone and they have these lesions, we're going to unroof a lesion, send it to public health, they send it off to the CDC, and we're going to make the diagnosis of a pox virus. It's probably going to be pretty prominent when you see it. You know.
So it's a diagnosis based on, it's not culture, or I don't know what it is, but it's
a
not,
swab.
Okay, so it's not a serology test. It's a clinical syndrome with particularly characteristic lesions that are positive on swab.
Right. So in my world, if like, let's say Sean Franklin called me for urgent care and said, hey, I've got this guy that was at a rave party in Belgium, and he's young and he's healthy, and now he's here with what looks like the flu, but I did my flu swab and it's negative. You know, in my differential, I'm going to wonder, is that acute HIV? Is that syphilis? And now I'm going to think, oh, I wonder if that could be monkeypox, because Belgium just had a cluster of cases. You know, right. And then in 1 to 3 days, we'll see a lesion.
Yeah.
We'll either biopsy it or swab it. And then I'm going to put that in a dry swab, in a dry container, not viral media. You don't need to know this. I'll send it to public health, and I'll work with that. So I expect to be the point guard, should you have any cases here. And then I always get this question, what PPE? For right now, we think that PPE is going to be N95, a face shield, gown, and gloves, just to be extra cautious to start with in patients who are symptomatic. We don't know if this is an STD yet. We don't know what the prolonged exposure is, whether it's sexual exposure or body fluid secretions or not. So that we don't know yet, and that's going to be probably part of the investigations. I thought that information would be helpful to everyone. I thought that would be able to say, okay, who's going to ask me what, and what can I share with you? And I'm happy to send these slides out as well, Gary. So if people want to print these, just so they're sitting next to the desk, saying, okay, if I get peppered with emails, you know, what's the data? What can I say? What do I need to know?
So to put it in context, we're extremely unlikely to ever see this. The education is for our patients who are going to be extremely anxious about this.
Yeah.
That we can speak with some authority and confidence that it's unlikely.
Right. So if I'm a doc custodian or homeowner airway, what's the chance they're going to walk in the door? Incredibly rare. There's only 5 cases in the U.S. I think we're going to see a cluster of cases
somewhere
around the U.S.
Yeah.
More likely in San Francisco, more likely in Los Angeles than in Sonoma County. But if we do see them, I think we're going to be ready to go, and I'm happy to help.
Great. Very helpful.
Right.
We're learning. Yeah. I just have a couple more announcements before we finish up. The first slide talks about the Well-Being of Women Physicians Survey. So this is a survey that's done, I believe, every 2 years by several different parties, and the CMA is involved this year. And they sent it out to all women physicians in the state of California. You should have received an invitation to survey. I think an email went out on May 10 from Erica McGuire. So just reminding you, if you have a chance, women physicians to contribute to that. And then my last announcement, my last slide, is something I talked about at the all-group meeting, HealthStream. So we all have required HealthStream courses that we need to complete early this year by August 30th. It's short. There's 2 courses, about an hour at a time. But what I want you to know is that HealthStream as a medium is going away. I'm told June 19th, HealthStream will shut off. And then Sutter Health is transitioning to an entire new format for all their HR materials. And it's called Workday, and it's going to have its own video educational component. But the transition from one to the other, they're not going to speak to each other. So the information in HealthStream will not transfer to Workday. Any course that you're taking in HealthStream that you haven't fully finished, you've done 5 of 7 chapters, will not be picked up. You will have to start it over in Workday. And on top of that, we all know that when you go to new software, there are hiccups. It's unlikely to work perfectly when it first comes up. So my suggestion, you have about 3 weeks. And I really suggest you take that hour now before summer comes down on you, while you're working with HealthStream that you're familiar with. Knock these things out, and this won't be a problem for you. So that's my reminder.
I thought it was going to mean we didn't have to do it anymore. We still have trainings.
No HealthStream.
More HealthStream. No HealthStream means that we still have trainings to do under a different format.
Right. Something like that. Yeah. So last thing I want to say, this is our 50th show, and I actually want to take this opportunity to thank Gary. This is kind of billed as the 2 Garys, but as you know, it's not equal to Gary's. I start and stop the show, but you know, Gary's got the beef. Gary, I want to say thank you, and I'm saying this on behalf of everybody who watches, but particularly for Smugger, who this is intended for. Really for the knowledge base you have and the education you have provided. I don't think our providers are aware of how fortunate we've been over the last 2 years, because I meet with other groups, and they will say their primary care docs are going crazy. There's no guidance whatsoever. Everybody's doing their own thing. And that has not occurred here because Gary's taken an interest in this and has worked hard. And
Well, that's
so
really nice.
we benefit from that. And on top of that, I think, Gary, you've been spearheading the clinical response of Sonoma County. You've worked with us on our ambulatory side. You've taken care of people in the ICU, and then you've done a lot for the community. And I think of the Press Democrat articles. He was just on the front page of Press Democrat last week, folks, talking about the flu. And just all the forums you've done to communicate the entire community. And we wanted to say thank you. So, you know, because it's our 50th anniversary, our 50th show, and all of that, I hereby today crown you the king of COVID. Lay it on.
Okay. Here we have it.
Turn it around. Turn it around.
Like this.
Oh, it looks lovely. Looks
How's
lovely.
that? Do I look like a total dork?
No, not yet.
Well, I'm going to wear this in our next all group meeting. I do want to say something though. I want to tell everyone in the group, it's really great to be a part of this group. I just wish I had joined the group earlier, really. I had spent so much time working in a different organization and I was killing it. I was the best that I ever was and I was miserable. And it's just been a joy to be here. So all the work I'm doing, I just really love it. I love working with everyone and I love the questions. The people really here are kind and they're just good to work with. So I have never been as happy in medicine as I am right now. And I want to thank everyone for that. That's because you let me, you know, take a shot at this ID doc that you didn't know you knew. So I appreciate that, everyone.
Well, it's been a good run. Here's hoping we don't have 50 more episodes of COVID. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.